And we are going to continue in the book of Job through this talk this morning. It will be page 426 of the church Bibles. And we're going to read from Job chapter 2 verse 11 to chapter 3 verse 26. It's quite a lengthy reading. It needs to be because it encompasses one particular discourse, or should I say monologue at this point. And as you know from the last two sessions, Job is not the most uplifting book in the Bible. It's hard, it's full of hard questions, it's full of hard situations, it's full of difficulties and suffering and trouble. And so we are probably at the hardest point now, I'm afraid to say, this morning. So last week was tough with the whole events of what happened to this man who everything was going well for, and then he just lost everything. And he even lost his health at the end as well. And he seems to do well. He didn't curse God. He, as it were, won the challenge for God that Job would stand firm in God even when all went wrong. The accusation that Satan, the devil, had made against him. But here, understandably, Job starts to ask questions. And that's what we're going to be looking at this morning. So it's page 46 of the church Bibles. I'm calling it Job's Anguish. It begins at Job 2 verse 11. We're just going to pray before we have the reading and the message. Father God, we commit ourselves before you, Lord, as we look at uncomfortable issues today. And we know that we cannot just pretend they're not there or hope they won't happen or anything like that. But we ask that you'll give us the strength to look out for what we can, to live for you in all circumstances, to remember that you're with us. And help us, Lord, as we look for your voice, even amongst these really hard words. May we be open to your spirit. May I know your wisdom as I give these words, this message. And we just commit this time before you in Jesus' name. Amen. So Job 2 from verse 11. When 3 of Job's friends heard of the tragedy he had suffered, they got together and travelled from their homes to comfort and console him. Their names were Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. When they saw Job from a distance, they scarcely recognised him. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes and threw dust into the air over their heads to show their grief. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. At last Job spoke, and he cursed the day of his birth. He said, "Let the day of my birth be erased and the night I was conceived. Let that day be turned to darkness, let it be lost even to God on high, and let no light shine on it. Let the darkness and utter gloom claim that day for its own. Let a black cloud overshadow it, and let the darkness terrify it. Let that night be blotted off the calendar, never again to be counted among the days of the year, never again to appear among the months. Let that night be childless, let it have no joy. Let those who are experts at cursing, whose cursing could rouse Leviathan, curse that day. Let its morning stars remain dark, let it hope for light, but in vain. May it never see the morning light. Curse that day for failing to shut my mother's womb, for letting me be born to see all this trouble. Why wasn't I born dead? Why didn't I die as I came from the womb? Why was I laid on my mother's lap? Why did she nurse me at her breasts? Had I died at birth, I would now be at peace. I would be asleep and at rest. I would rest with the world's kings and prime ministers, whose great buildings now lie in ruins. I would rest with princes rich in gold, whose palaces were filled with silver. Why wasn't I buried like a stillborn child, like a baby who never lives to see the light? For in death the wicked cause no trouble, and the weary are at rest. Even captives are at ease in death, with no guards to curse them. Rich and poor are both there, and the slave is free from his master. Oh, why give light to those in misery, and life to those who are bitter? They long for death and it won't come. They search for death more eagerly than for hidden treasure. They're filled with joy when they finally die, and rejoice when they find the grave. Why is life given to those with no future, those God has surrounded with difficulties? I cannot eat for sighing, my groans pour out like water. What I always feared has happened to me. What I dreaded has come true. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest. Only trouble comes. I have here a mask, a cloth mask. We all remember these. And this mask was made by a lady called Priscilla. She made a lot of them, actually. She, with quite a lot of foresight, before the mask mandate came in 2020, she started making these and selling them for a decent price. And I purchased 2 or 3, I think it was, off Priscilla. She used to come to this church about 6 years ago. She had quite a lot of foresight when it came to that, actually. And then a couple of months ago, I heard that she had died. It's like she used to come with her child, Juanita, to this church. And yeah, she died probably not that suddenly, but I hadn't seen her for a while. She only came here for a few months. She decided it probably wasn't for her, but we used to meet occasionally, and there was no issue between us or anything. We always got on well. She always had an exhortation to make. If you remember Priscilla, you'll know that. It was usually warmly welcomed because you were judging that she was trying to say what she thought was the Lord's will. But she passed away of lung cancer a couple of months ago at the age of 46. I don't think she ever smoked. Not that I know of. Anyway, she certainly didn't smoke when I knew her. And we tend to think of lung cancer with smoking, but of course cancer can get you anywhere, anytime, no matter what you're doing. It's a scary thing, isn't it? And of course the thought on my mind was, what about the poor child? This is a single parent. Juanita was only with her. I believe she just left primary school. It's a scary time anyway, going into secondary school. You've lost the one person you're with. And the question, as Job is asking here, is why? Why? Why has this happened? I did attend her funeral a couple of weeks ago, and I was relieved to know that the uncle has agreed to look after her, and he'll stay with her as long as it takes just to get through the worst times. That he's going to take her with him to the US. He'll adopt her. And I'm grateful for that. Grateful that someone will be looking out for her. But of course, he won't completely replace her mum. He won't. And again, the question is, why was she taken like that? Why her? And of course, that question is asked again and again and again and again, especially when someone young dies, especially in tragic accidents that happen, or other mishaps, or random acts of senseless violence. We saw that this week with that guy Charlie Kirk in the United States, just shot dead. Suddenly his life ended. He didn't know that was going to happen, but it happened. And all these things make us ask these questions. But of course we come into this reading today with the introduction to Job's friends. Job's 3 friends. Job's 3 friends get a bad press, don't they? We'll see why later. But I believe they were really true good friends to him. Because what did they do? They heard of his mishaps, they heard of his tragedy, and they came. We don't know what distance they came, but we know they made the effort to come and be with him, and to be with him in his suffering, to be with him possibly outside the camp. Because remember from last week with those boils, he may well have been ostracised, he may well have been exiled like a leper, and they took the risk of going out to him in isolation, as we might call it today. And they identified with him in his suffering. They even put dust on their ashes to show that they were mourning with him. They did exactly the right thing. The Apostle Paul, in fact, in Romans chapter 12, tells us, exhorts us to do this. He says, "Be happy with those who are happy, and weep with those who weep." And that is exactly what these 3 men do, these 3 friends. And as much as we might disagree with what they said later on, they were good friends to Job. They really were. They came, they identified him, they sat with him, and they were just weeping to show that they cared. And they spent a long time with him. They spent a whole week before the big discourse that dominates the book of Job. They spent a whole week there. It's sometimes said that love is a 4-letter word spelled Time. When we give time to people and our full attention. And it's hard to give our full attention, isn't it? This doesn't help.
And I know that often I'm not giving someone my full attention. I'm sorry if you've ever felt this, and I'm sure you have, because something's happening, or someone's constantly, or something else on your mind, because it's quite hard to hold full attention. But Job's friends come and they give him their full attention, and they stay with him, and they don't say much. I think they probably, when it says they said nothing of consequence or controversy. I'm sure they didn't completely sit in silence. They probably said hello and made some, but no more than that. But sometimes silence in itself is golden, isn't it? When we see someone in the depths of mourning, we genuinely often don't know what to say. I've struggled with this myself a lot. I'm in a position now where I have no real choice about getting involved in these things, but certainly it would be one of the last things I want to do. I remember when I was a late teenager, I'd started going to church as a teenager, and a couple of years later, they said, oh, such and such has lost her father. It was the first time I'd really seen someone in the midst of real grief. Someone I'd spoken to before, I think she was in my Bible study group, and I said, can I be honest, I avoided her like anything. Because I didn't know what to say. You're scared of saying the wrong thing, you're scared of saying anything. And of course it sort of confronts you with death, with mortality. And it's sort of easier just to avoid the issue. So when I say silence is golden, maybe, but your presence is important. And again, I remember this woman. She was a friend of the guy that I shared a house with when I was training for ministry in the evangelist college. And she had lost her husband in her 20s. You don't expect that, do you, when you get married? And she said that the what compounded her suffering was her friends all left her. And I don't believe they were all horrible people necessarily. They just didn't know what to do. They couldn't comprehend what had happened, and it was easier just to absent themselves. Yes, it was selfish and self-centered. Yes, we can agree with that, I think. But to be fair, they probably just didn't know what to do. And so she lost her husband. She lost most of her friends at the same time. Because it was hard for them. What do you say? You're scared. It's an emotional minefield, isn't it? That person is going to be very emotionally volatile, understandably so. And you're scared of upsetting them or suddenly getting the object of their wrath. No one wants to be the object of anyone's wrath, do they? Because you possibly said the wrong thing. And the saying one thing might be the right thing for one grieving person, completely wrong for another. Very hard to get it right, isn't it? We can easily make mistakes in these things. And of course, again, it would have confronted them with their own mortality. And it was easier just to avoid. Put your head in the sand and distance yourself. And so this poor woman had lost even more than the original horrendous loss. Job's friends come and they risk being right with him. And we must commend them for that. I remember a chap that I'd had some dealings with, and he suddenly sent me a text. My wife's died. He found her dead. It was sudden, absolutely suddenly, no warning. He found her dead. Again, at a pretty young age, I think around 30. And I do remember I actually made the effort to travel up quite a long way up country to see him and then spend a few days with him. I thought that's what I should do. But I've got a horrible feeling I wasn't much use. And that's part of the worry when you're wanting to identify and be with those you mourn. You probably think you're not much use. You worry you'll say the wrong thing. And I remember being so scared of saying something I probably didn't help very much. I hope he appreciated that I was there for him. I've had very little contact with him since, which maybe tells its own story, or maybe he just stayed in his anger and bitterness. And while we can express ourselves, we cannot stay there forever. That is not healthy. At some point, we must be able to move on. Because grief has stages, doesn't it? All sorts of stages. Denial, anger, questioning, obviously upset, clearly all through it. And it has stages which people move through at different paces. And eventually time is a healer, but obviously not a complete healer. There's always some sort of pain left there from that grief. And as we go into chapter 3, we'll see that Job is going to express himself. And so we have this great lament that he makes. It's hard reading, isn't it? But there's other great laments in the Bible. A number of the Psalms are like it. David expressed it on occasion, but probably the most depressing psalm, if we want to put it like that, is Psalm 88, which was written a psalm of the descendants of Korah. It wasn't David. And the sad thing about this psalm is it doesn't end on a good note. When David is sad, he tends to end on a good note. Psalm 88 says these words: God, hear my prayer, listen to my cry. My life is full of troubles and death draws near. I am as good as dead, like a strong man with no strength left. And then verse 16 to 18. Your fierce anger has overwhelmed me. Your terrors have paralysed me. They swirl around me like floodwaters all day long. They have engulfed me completely. You have taken away my companions and loved ones. Darkness is my closest friend. And that's where it ends. It's a scary and horrible place to have the last word in that particular psalm. We tend to think of Jeremiah as the prophet of sorrows, don't we? If someone says you're a bit of a Jeremiah, it means that you're negative, moaning, complaining. Yeah, life is awful for you, isn't it? It can be used as an insult. Jeremiah wrote a whole book called Lamentations, which means song of sadness. And in Lamentations, he's mourning the loss of Jerusalem and the exile of the people from the promised land. That's what he's doing in Lamentations. But before he even gets there, Jeremiah has a huge complaint before God. It's a little bit similar to Job's. But at this point, Jeremiah is complaining bitterly about his vocation as a prophet. He's so angry, he doesn't want to do it because he knows it's going to make him unpopular. Because the words that Jeremiah spoke before the Lamentations, of course, were words of judgment on his people. Challenging words about their sin, the fact that they're going to suffer for it. So you can imagine Jeremiah was not a popular man at all. In fact, very unpopular. In fact, on a number of occasions people tried to take his life. He was imprisoned, he was rejected and hated. And he knew that, and he was angry with God because he didn't feel he had a choice in the matter. And this is some of the things that Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 20. O Lord, you misled me, and I allowed myself to be misled. You are stronger than I am, and you overpowered me. Now I am mocked every day. Everyone laughs at me. When I speak, the words burst out. Violence and destruction I shout. So these messages from the Lord have made me a household joke. But if I say I'll never mention the Lord or speak in his name, his word burns in my heart like a fire. It's like a fire in my bones. I'm worn out trying to hold it in. I can't do it. It's really sad stuff, isn't it? Do you remember Apostle Paul talks in 2 Corinthians about the thorn in his flesh? We don't know what that thorn is, but we know what Jeremiah's thorn in the flesh is. It's his own vocation and ministry. He doesn't want to do it. It's quite harsh, isn't it? And so Jeremiah goes on to say, and this has parallels with Job, in verses 14 to 18 of Jeremiah 20, yet I cursed the day I was born. May no one celebrate the day of my birth. I cursed the messenger who told my father, good news, you have a son. Let him be destroyed like the cities of old, that the Lord overthrew without mercy. Terrify him all day long with battle shouts, because he did not kill me at birth. Oh, that I had died in my mother's womb, that her body had been my grave. Why was I ever born? My entire life has been filled with trouble, sorrow, and shame. This is hard to read, isn't it? It's really hard to read such words from that great prophet that Jeremiah was. But Job, of course, echoes a lot of what Jeremiah says here. He curses his birth and existence. He curses the day of his birth. He curses his conception even. He wishes it wasn't there. In fact, in some ways, Job goes even further than Jeremiah. He makes this counter-cosmic incantation that calls for a reversal of creation. And it's sort of summed up in Job chapter 3, verse 4, because his words actually appropriate the language and imagery of Genesis 1, but in a negative sense. So in Job 3:4, he actually says, let there be darkness. Remember the first voice of creation in Genesis 1:1, let there be light. Job is actually saying, let there be darkness. But of course, not over everything, but just over the day of his birth. He would rather that be wiped from the record. Such is his horror, such is terror. Why was I ever born? I don't know how many of you are fans of Doctor Who. I'm not that much because I preferred it in the late 1970s when Tom Baker was the Doctor. They've never done it as well as him in my book. That's subjective, of course. But I did watch a few episodes a number of years ago, but of course much more recently. And in one of those episodes of Doctor Who, of course he always has his assistant, doesn't he, with him? He always has his sidekick. And his assistant was a lady who had a boyfriend. And the boyfriend sort of hung around with them on their journeys. Remember, they've got that police box thing, the TARDIS. And they're in the TARDIS one day, and then something goes wrong. Remember, it's all about space travel. It's all fantasy stuff, space travel and time travel. And there's some sort of rip in the time continuum. And what happens is that this rip in the time continuum suddenly becomes physical and starts to encroach in the TARDIS. Because remember, the TARDIS means time and relative dimensions in space. That's what it means. So that's where it comes from. And this thing, and they try and get out of the way of it, and then it catches the boyfriend of Doctor Who's assistant, and he gets caught in this time cut, and he disappears. Not only does it kill him, he disappears. Not only does he disappear, but no one remembers he'd ever existed. It's really scary, actually. I thought, that is dark and nasty. It's like he'd never been born. His memory was erased and no one remembered him. Isn't that scary? But isn't that what Job seems to be asking for here in the depths of his grief and his anguish? Sometimes when someone's done something absolutely terrible, their name is wiped from the records. It used to happen in the ancient world. Someone would do some horrendous thing or some treasonous act, and not only would they be brutally executed, but then every record of them would be removed, as though they'd never been there. A lot of you will remember Fred and Rosemary West, and wish you didn't remember them. Awful, horrible, horrendous people. The House of Horrors in Gloucester. And just some pretty bad stuff in other places, but the main one was the House of Horrors in Gloucester, their place they lived in. And after they were arrested and put away, he took his life quite soon afterwards. She will never get out of prison. Well, I hope not anyway. And but after that, and after the police had sorted out all the evidence of all the murders, because they were mass murders, it was a lot of people they killed. What they did, once they got rid of everything, they demolished their house. But they didn't just demolish their house. They took it completely apart, so there was nothing left there. And even the very fabric of the house, the wood, the cement, the bricks, were ground down into dust so that no one would take a macabre souvenir away from them, with them. And then it was either put in some pit in the ground or thrown in the sea. So there was no record of that place. And if you go there today, and I have been in Gloucester, but I chose not to, because I thought I'm not going to be one of these weird tourists who looks at such things. But apparently there's a gap between the houses. There's some sort of garden, which may well be, remember the people they killed. And then there's a little sort of alleyway through, but it's as though it was never there. That's the sort of thing we're looking at here. Job wants his entire existence expunged from the records. He wishes he'd never been born. And actually we get some really dark things here. I've been looking at ethics in my master's course. What does he say? I wish I'd been terminated. What does that tell us? It reminds us of abortion, doesn't it? Very big buzz issue, isn't it? It's an issue, and we would, I think most of us as Christians say that abortion is wrong, wouldn't we? There are certain situations where I would struggle to condemn a woman for aborting, I have to say. But Job is basically asking, why wasn't I terminated? I didn't have the technology for it then, but why wasn't I terminated? Why didn't they just give up on me in my mother's womb? And then later on, he starts saying things like, it'd be better to be dead. It'd be better to be dead. Because in death, everyone's equal. The captor and the captive are equal. The slave and the master are equal. The kings and the lowliest of peasants are equal. They're all equal. They rest in death. Those who, especially those who struggle, will rest in death. Job talks about rest, and we may wonder if he's talking about some afterlife or not. Thankfully, and this is going to be a bit of hope in every message, later on in Job, we can see that he has an absolute unshakable belief in a world to come. and that God will be with him in it. We must hang on to that even in this dark time. Job does come to a far better place. But in this moment, he wishes he was dead. He wishes he was dead. And of course, another big issue at the moment is euthanasia. Euthanasia from the Greek literally means good death. That's what it means. People who want to die with dignity rather than suffering. And in many ways, we can understand where people are coming from when they're in great pain. Mainly physical pain, but sometimes mental pain as well. And then people who want to end it in a better way. These are hard subjects to think about, but they are ones that are very real in our society today. And I have to say, when I saw my mum in the last few days of her life with cancer, and she was a shadow, a skeleton, you know, and obviously in pain, I prayed she'd die. I did, and I hated myself for doing it, but I didn't want her to suffer. I didn't want her in pain. And I said to the people, can you please give her all the anaesthetics that you can, all the morphine that you can, to stop her suffering. And I didn't say it, but end her life quicker. And I hated saying that, but she had no life left. And sadly, in a mental way, Job is feeling like this. And so while I would say that the sanctity of life is in God's hands, we must have a lot of sympathy and a lot of pastoral care for those who really are in that sort of place where they're struggling. We really do. These issues aren't quite as clear-cut as we might say when you actually meet people in those situations. And Job just feels like life isn't worth living. But here's a caution. He will come to a better place. And if someone said, well, why don't you kill yourself now? That would not be the answer at all, can I say. But he felt like it. Let's be honest, he felt like it. And these words again are difficult. When he mentions Leviathan, I don't want to go into Leviathan, but it's basically a creature of chaos. Later on in the Bible, it's equated with Satan himself, the devil, which is interesting because Satan, of course, has been the one who's instigated all this. Although, as I said in the last 2 weeks, God has allowed it. We cannot get away from that. God has allowed this to happen, and Job knows that full well. But he even goes back on something that the devil had said to God, even though, again, Job's not aware of his conversation in the heavens. Remember what the devil said? Job only worships you and is on your side because you've laid a hedge of protection around him. And so, and you've blessed him and given him all he is. Now Job feels hemmed in by God in a negative sense. That hedge of protection has become something that's like a prison to Job. Isn't it interesting how that's turned around? But yet Job never actually curses God. He never does what the devil said he would do. Although he does, in effect, come fairly close in cursing effective creation. But Job is in the depths of despair here, and he gives vent to his suffering. Can I say that in those times which we'll go through, the hard times, these things should in many ways be a comfort to us, because it means we can give vent to our deepest and darkest emotions. It's not like the Bible says, well, you shouldn't be going through that. You should have victory. You know, you're with God and everything's all right. And you'll see your loved ones in glory. Sometimes we don't have that comfort anyway, in all honesty. We cannot be sure of that. But at other times, even we do, we're still going to miss them. Aren't we? We're still going to grieve their loss. You can't take that away. And the old Stoical approach, which was prevalent in Greece in ancient times, it's been prevalent in this country. The Stoical attitude, which is suffering is a bad thing. Don't be in sorrow and always keep a brave face. It's been a big thing, hasn't it? And the Brits called it the stiff upper lip. And it was especially hard on men. Because men were not supposed to show emotion, not show weakness, bottle it all up. But of course, when you bottle everything up, it's got to go somewhere. And of course, suicide among young men is high. And that's one of the reasons, I believe, because people feel they cannot express their emotions. So, and the Bible does not avoid this. In stories like Job's, in the Psalms, in Jeremiah, in Ecclesiastes, which Solomon wrote, we see that people can give vent to their emotions. Because remember, God knows our thoughts. So even if we say, I'm not going to say anything negative, God knows what we're thinking anyway in the midst of our grief. And so Psalm 139 it's helpful to be reminded of Psalm 139. O Lord, you have examined my heart and know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away. Verse 4, you know what I'm going to say even before I say it, Lord. So God knows. God knows. He knows where we are and what we're going through. So we may as well voice it, as Job does here. One more little story. When I was working up in Cumbria a number of years ago, Ma and I went on holiday. We went to Bulgaria, I think it was something like March time, and we had a dog at the time, and we were just like, where do we leave the dog when we were going away on holiday? And there was a lady who had a farm with her husband. She went to one of the churches I was involved in, and she said, well, I'll look after you. I've got a farm, I've got dogs. It's not even going to be that difficult. I was very grateful. She's called Eileen Dixon, was her name. And so we took our dog to Eileen's farm, and she said, oh, I've got another dog with me for these couple of weeks because my daughter's going skiing. And so I've got her dog as well. So that's great. So we went away on holiday, came back. I rang the farm and said, because I was only 10 minutes drive away, and said, I'm just going to pick up my dog. But the voice didn't sound familiar. It didn't sound like Eileen. And it turned out and said, well, actually, I'm her sister. I said, okay, right, okay, but can I pick the dog up? And she said, it's not a good idea to come round the moment. Something dreadful's happened. So I was like, well, what's happened to my dog? My immediate response, is the dog dead? Has it been injured by one of the other dogs? Have you lost it? And she said, no, your dog's fine. But Eileen's daughter died in an avalanche. She was skiing all day. I don't know, it's hard, isn't it? Again, my first thought was to run. I don't want to know, I don't want to get involved in this. But I said to her pretty quickly, I said, look, you don't need my dog on your farm. I'm going to come up and go. I'm just going to come up to the farm, take the dog and go, because she doesn't need more hassle at the moment. So I drove up there, and can I be honest and say, I prayed that I wouldn't see her. Because what do you say in such a circumstance? And I knew that in a sense she'll vent to me being a Christian minister as well. I'm really going to be in the firing line. And, it's a selfish response. But anyway, of course, God doesn't let me off like that. So as soon as I drive onto the farm, she's there walking the dogs back to the farmhouse, probably including her daughter's dog. I'm not sure, I didn't really look much. I just noticed mine and I noticed her. And so I got out of the car and she's coming. And I'm thinking, God, what do I do? Help, I want the ground to swallow me. It's very selfish, isn't it? And in the end, probably like Joe's friends, the only thing I could do was hug her. Gave her a hug. And that was it. So I was there in the present, but there was no point saying, absolutely, what can you say? What can you say to someone in that situation? And remember, Job's lost his 10 children. But so I hugged her. And then she did start to give vent to her thoughts. She said, I've been praying, and I've been saying, God, I hate you. God, I hate you. And she said, I've been swearing, and I spoke for a second, and I thought, no, she needs to let this out. She does need to let this out and give vent to the thoughts. She cannot stay in that place, of course. You cannot stay there. But there's nothing wrong with being there in those moments. Because otherwise we just deny ourselves, and it's going to cause big trouble later on psychologically. So that's what I was there for, and I hope I was of help to her in that time, just by being there, being ready, and being willing just to take whatever she said. That's a costly thing to do, isn't it, for us? But we must be willing to do so for our brothers and sisters in Christ, for our families, our friends, our work colleagues, our neighbours, when they're going through hard times. Are we willing to take that risk, that sacrifice of time, of emotional energy, and even of maybe being attacked as Christians, because why has God allowed this? Because God has. We cannot avoid that. God has. Otherwise, he's not the king of the universe. And there's a lot of unanswered questions, I know, but we need to be there, and also be willing to accept the care of others when we're suffering. Because it'll be good, when we can share with others, then we can slowly heal. So these are hard topics, I understand. But the best thing of all is that Christ walks with us. Christ walks with us. God is not aloof. It's not like he doesn't care and he's just up there and he's avoiding all these things and we're suffering down here. When David in Psalm 22, he said these words, he said, my God, why have you abandoned me? Why are you so far away when I groan for help? Every day I call to you, my God, but you do not answer. Every night you hear my voice, but I find no relief. Of course, David's descendant, Jesus, said those first words, my God, why have you forsaken me? Jesus knew what it was to go through abject suffering. He is the Lord that we worship, and he is with us in. And above all, we can lean on him in those dark times and use his strength to help others in their dark times, that they might be able to walk through and come through. Yes, battered, yes, bruised, but strengthened ultimately in the faith of the one who willingly took our sin on himself. And when Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? It wasn't just he felt that. He was forsaken because he became sin for our sakes. And the Father and the Spirit, I believe, turn their backs on him because they are holy and can't look at sin. So Jesus knew what it was to be forsaken himself. And he walks right with us. And as we look at Job, and I know it's not great, it doesn't make fun reading, but it's so important so that when we go through hard times, we can look at these passages. We can even maybe speak them out in the darkest of our times. But we are above all hang on to God who will ultimately take us through. And he's there right with us. May the name of the Lord be praised. Amen. We're going to sing a song now. It's called, we know the chorus, it is well with my soul. It begins, when peace like a river. The author of this song wrote this after he'd lost a number of family members in an accident at sea. So he wrote this in the depth of his grief.
Amen.